that went forward under that hailstorm of fire. And then, again, I think the most realistic thing for any soldier to listen to is those first 17 minutes of Saving Private Ryan. To understand what noise is, pure noise. You know how loud one single shot is from a 30-06, for example, how loud is one shot? Now add it by 10,000 and add artillery and mortars and everything else going on. It's deafening. How these people did it, I don't know myself. It was a major achievement. And they did it. I mean, if you're walking in the cemetery at Colville-sur-Mer, I always say, and Darlene and I have done this many times, I said, just take a look at one of those crosses and look at them and think about it. Every cross there, we got next, go to that, the cemetery one. There's the cemetery that Eisenhower came up with. By the way, for ceremonies, they have a platform of boards that goes across that reflecting pole. And so they have the ceremonies there. For example, they'll have that this year for the 70th for sure. Next slide, please, Tony. Here you see the cemetery at Colville-sur-Mer. This is where the Big Red One went up. The most storied regiment probably in the invasion, had experience in both North Africa and Sicily and Italy, and then was transferred to there. And this is their attack site where they put the cemetery. But each marker, take a look at it, and remember when you're looking at it and looking at the name, that every one of those soldiers had a mom and a dad, a sweetheart or a wife, sons or daughters, brothers or sisters. And they died so we can sit here in freedom. It's important. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's important that Alexandria is commemorating the 70th anniversary of D-Day this week, and particularly on Saturday. And again, I hope that you'll join us in those commemorative events that are planned. And I'd like just to close, I guess, with the thought that yes, it was 70 years ago, but it's up to us as citizens of the United States of America today to remember what they sacrificed for. They sacrificed for our freedom. They sacrificed for the French. One of the things that is very, very inspiring to me as an American is to go over there and see how the French young people remember. If you go to Normandy, they remember. They're brought up to remember. And then you'll see young French children putting flowers on graves. We see it all the time, don't we? We have a society, the Westlake Society, remembering Allied soldiers. Okay? And we're talking about young people. We're not talking about older people that were there at the time of the invasion. No, they're brought up to remember. It's a thing of remembrance. And it's something that I think that oftentimes Americans take for granted. They don't take for granted in France. They have lived under duress. They have lived under invasion. They have lived under a conquering foe. And they do appreciate very much. Go to Normandy. You know, sometimes you hear people say about, oh, people in Paris aren't very friendly. Go to Normandy. Go to Normandy. There is no one. You can tell what zone you're in. You'll see British zone, flags in the British zone, Canadian flags in the Canadian zone, and American flags. You'll know where you are. It's amazing. So that's how I'd like to close. I'd like to just all of you just to think about the sacrifices of those soldiers who are buried at Colville-sur-Mer. I should say that Teddy Roosevelt Jr. is buried there. He's a Medal of Honor winner. I think that was Henry Fonda in The Longest Day, for those of you that associate movie stars with people. He's buried next to his brother. His brother is the only World War I soldier. He happens to be, and he was a pilot in World War I, Quentin. He was shot down during World War I, buried. In Teddy Roosevelt Jr.'s will, they found that he wanted to be buried next to his brother. So so when Eisenhower buried him as he wished to be buried with his soldiers, he went and got the body of Quentin Roosevelt, who was in a different part of France. He'd been shot down in the last months of World War I as a pilot, and brought him, and he is buried next to Teddy Roosevelt. There's also women buried in that cemetery, and my wife Carlene had a very strange occurrence. She had asked me one time, are there any women buried in the cemetery? And I really didn't know for sure, and I think she took 3 or 4 steps, and there was a soldier, or a woman soldier, that was buried in that cemetery. More importantly, she wrote then to the records office, and they sent the complete file of this woman soldier who was killed in, I think, a Jeep accident during the time. And we knew her next to kin, we knew her, what articles, you know, every commander does the inventory. Very, very interesting. So there's a lot of research that everybody can do if you're interested in this type of thing. But again, I'll close then with the thought of remembrance for what these soldiers did for us on D-Day, and I hope that this anniversary, the 70th anniversary, which is so important for us all, can be celebrated with the true passion that we should have for what those soldiers did. Thank you very much.
The talk portion of our event tonight, and in just a moment we'll be taking questions. Colonel Christensen will be taking questions, but would you mind giving him another round of applause?
Okay, questions? Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Would you recommend a couple books about D-Day that are like the best?
I could recommend about 100 books. I think, you know, even though it's an oldie but goodie, Cornelius Ryan, The Longest Day. I'd start there. But there are many, I hate to get into the corner, but for a person that's not an expert, that's a great place to start. Yes, sir.
Yes, this is taken from The Longest Day. When Rommel was driving back from Germany the day of the invasion, he turned to Helmut Planning's aide and said, if I wanted to win the war in 2 weeks, now it would have taken longer than that, I would invade simultaneously from Normandy and the Riviera. Would you tell the audience that was the original plan?
Yeah, the original plan was, in fact, to have 2 fronts. In fact, that's a good point. The original plan was especially original because that's what they were telling Stalin all along. That there was going to be an invasion of Normandy, and there was going to be an invasion of southern France, and it was going to be simultaneous. They couldn't pull it off. Believe it or not, and I'm glad you brought that point up.
Admiral King and the Marianas. Tell the audience about that, because it was evil what Admiral King did.
Well, yeah, I don't want to get into politics, but you're right. But one of the strategic things about the landings and the fact that it was delayed so many different times had to do with landing craft, Higgins boats, okay? There weren't enough of them. There could never be enough of them. After the invasion of North Africa, then the invasion of Sicily, then the invasion of Italy, there were never enough Higgins boats. And so there aren't enough Higgins boats to simultaneously attack on both the Normandy front and the southern front. And they couldn't get things there. And of course, there was politics involved. And the Pacific was obviously trying to get as much attention as they could. And rightfully so, because they were battling a determined goal. And it was really a balancing act by the Americans trying to figure out, where do we put our priorities? There was an announced priority that Europe was going to be first. But, you know, people were dying and things were happening in the Pacific. And there had to be some form of progress. But the Higgins boat, oftentimes delayed. Marshall at one time thought they were going to invade France, and even had told Stalin that we might be able to put some people ashore near Cherbourg, 2 divisions, as early as 1942. 1942. But think about it, we're in the war in December 1941, and we don't come ashore in Europe until 1944. That is a long time. You can understand why Stalin's wondering, what's going on here? They keep delaying. And as you pointed out, there was supposed to be a simultaneous attack. The Southern Front doesn't open up for weeks later. Okay? But Normandy had already by that time drawn off a lot of the German troops that were in the South and moved north. And so when the Southern attack does come, the soldiers move rapidly north. Yes, sir.
Tom, are you able to comment on the training disaster that took place in southern England some weeks before?
Yes, that's very low. That's not very well known, but there was a total training disaster. Several thousand troops were killed, actually, in training to land and things like that. It was a total fiasco. There were many, and it was covered up. I might add. It was covered up for a number of reasons. Number one, didn't want to let people back home know that this disaster had occurred. These people had died for nothing, so to speak.